welcome to the Intuitively Wild podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Levine. Living intuitively wild is about coming back home to ourselves. Here we talk about how to live connected to ourselves, others, and nature, and make a commitment to radical authenticity, vulnerability, and acceptance. On this podcast, we delve into a wide range of topics that span the human experience. We peel back the layers and talk about the things that are often not talked about. This is a space for us all to walk and wander this path of life together. Let's dig into our roots and go deep. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Intuitively Wild, the podcast. Today, I have a really beautiful conversation with Jacques Anderson. And Jacques is a human design guide and coach who offers transformative coaching services informed by human design principles. We talk about how she discovered human design, which is actually how I discovered human design. And we go into her story, what her life was like when she found it, how it transformed her life, and different aspects of her human design chart. Of course, we go deep into human design, but we talk about so much more than that. We talk about being your most authentic and aligned self and defining what that means for you, defining what creativity means for you, what alignment means for you, really defining who you are, how you want to live your life, and being okay with that being completely unique and different than anyone else. We talk about so many of my favorite topics. Jacques and I have a lot in common. We're both Virgos and Scorpio risings. We have a lot of powerful similarities in our human design chart, and her energy is infectious. She just has this light to her that is so felt, and it reminds me of the power of energy and the power of living with authenticity and alignment to our values, because when we are doing that, it is truly felt by everyone and by the world around us. And it is clear to me that without even saying anything, Jacques is doing just that. She is living true to herself. She embodies that. And it is why this conversation was so powerful. So I hope that it impacts you. I hope it sparks something in you. And I can't wait to hear what you guys think. Okay, Jacques, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you here and to talk all about human design and your journey and your path and all the things.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Okay. One question I like to start with is, what is something you wish people knew about you that you don't think many do?
Many people don't know that I'm an extroverted introvert. So I present like an extrovert. I'm very social, like I have a good sense of humor, but I'm actually like an introvert in the like heart of my soul. So I come back home and I'm just like, whew, or I need like a lot of alone time. And so I've had like arguments with friends, especially my friends who are extroverts, because they're like, you're an extrovert. And I'm like, you guys don't understand. So that's like one thing I wish people like knew, because when I take a step back, it doesn't feel like as jarring.
Yeah, and this actually has come up a couple times with other guests on the podcast saying similar sentiments. I think that people misunderstand what an introvert actually is. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're quiet or shy. It just means that you recharge by being alone. You get
Yes.
more energy by being by yourself, and also you being a projector. That makes so much sense.
Yes. Yep.
So, talking about projector and human design, how did you find human design? What was your path to initially discovering it? Because I know that you started off as a lawyer, which I want to get into as well, but how did you find human design?
Yeah, so there is a woman named Lacey Phillips. She has this platform. Okay, you're nodding and you know it. It's
Yes.
called To Be Magnetic, and it honestly is one of the tools that has changed my life. And in addition to having like this platform, she has a podcast. And the very first podcast episode is with Jenna Zoe, who is a very famous human design guide. And so I was listening to that podcast and some others, and they kept using terms like projector and generator, and the nerd in me was like, what does that mean? I'm always game for an assessment. That's the projector in myself. And so I just Googled it, like human design, ran my chart, and like the rest is history.
Mm. It That's exactly how I found human design too, by listening to Jenna Zoe on To Be Magnetic podcast. Yeah, on the expanded podcast.
Oh my
Yeah.
God. Remind
Yeah.
to me. We're friends now. We're best friends now. It's fine.
I know. Oh, and before we got on started recording, we were talking about how we are both Virgos and we're both Scorpio risings. So lots
Mhm.
of similarities here, which is fun.
So many. Yeah, I love that.
Okay, so you started off as a lawyer. And
Mhm.
how did you make that transition? How did you discover that you wanted to start shifting more towards offering human design readings and away from focusing on being a lawyer as your profession?
Yeah, so I started my career as a corporate attorney, and then I went into startups first as a lawyer, and then I started a startup with three other people. And so when I found human design, I wasn't even working in a legal capacity. I mean, I can still practice law. I keep current, but that wasn't like the main focus of my work. I had
Mhm.
started this company. I had been there for 3 years, and my mom actually got really sick. She has cancer, and so very long story short, I had to go home to St. Louis, where I'm from, take care of her for like half a year, like 6, 7 months. And during that time, I just was by the end of it, I was emotionally spent, very exhausted. But it was during this time that I also found human design, and I started getting more and more into it. And human design ended up being this like bright spot in like a sea of just unhappiness, to be quite honest. And so when I think many people, you first start reading everything you can find online. And then I went to two different human design guides. Each of them had been a human design guide for 10 years, a piece. And when they were doing the reading, I love the way they kind of wove the story of someone's energy. But when I got that experience, I was like, oh, I could do this. Like, I could learn this information. I can work with people in this capacity. So I ended up getting human design certified to give readings, and I started doing that with friends. And then I started charging for it. And then one of my good friends, who's also a coach, we have this saying like when a whisper becomes a scream. So at first, human design and like giving readings was like a whisper, like, oh, it's fun, do it on the side, it's a passion project. And then it got louder to like, there's a there. And then it got louder, like, you need to leave your current company and pursue
Mm.
this full time. So ultimately, I ended up transitioning to an advisor role at the startup that I co founded. And then I also got executive coach certified so that I can offer a much more expansive set of tools to people. And so that's how I kind of like made this somewhat gradual evolution from like lawyer to human design guide.
Wow. I feel that so many people find not only human design, but these spiritual practices or modalities when they're going through a really hard time in their life or when they're feeling lost or confused or overwhelmed. And human design, particularly, can help us really come back to ourselves and find this sense of grounding and purpose and alignment. I know it's done that for me, and it sounds like it did that for you as well. And
Mhm.
it can be so powerful and so life affirming. And I love this phrase when a whisper becomes a scream. And it makes me think of splenic authority and how you have a splenic authority, because I feel like, that splenic authority can be kind of a whisper. And
Mhm.
I would actually love you to speak on that and your relationship with your intuition and your authority in human design. What does that look like for you? How have you developed that? And maybe for people who don't know, you can talk about what splenic authority means to you.
Yeah. So splenic authority means in human design that my spleen is defined, and based off of like the different centers and my body graph that are defined, this is how I make decisions that's best suited for me. And so individuals who have splenic authority, they often make decisions in the moment. There's an instantaneous knowing that they have. Honestly, it's one of the most elusive because, to your point, the spleen talks in a whisper. It's kind of like fleeting. So if you don't catch it, you kind of lose it. And, sometimes it can come back around, but it's really like a one time thing. And so I really worked on my intuition two ways. The first one is like very human design specific. When I get those splenic hits, or like to use Lacey's terminology, pings, I write them down. I use this journal on my phone called Day One, It's amazing. If anyone needs a resource, it is not affiliated, but I just mentioned that because it's so helpful in like helping you capture whether or not you're someone who likes to write or like to speak or like do videos. It's like multiple modalities. And so I write down what I'm experiencing in the moment, or I'll like capture a voice note so I can always come back and like unpack what's going on. And honestly, sometimes my splenic authority works in a way that I can get like these intuitive hits that aren't even applicable to my life in that moment. It's like something that will unfold like 3 months, 6 months down the road. And now I'm starting to see some of these things that my kind of spleen and my intuition was telling me like a year ago come to light. The second thing that's really helped me with my intuition is pulling oracle cards. So every morning, as part of my morning practice, I have like a few decks, but I'll pull like at least one oracle card. And this woman who's like an intuitive guy who I work with, she kind of suggested it before I even found human design, because that's interesting how the universe works. It gives you tools before you need it.
Mm.
And her recommendation was to pull an oracle card, look at it, and then you intuit. What do you see? What do you smell? What do you hear? And what do you know? And you write those four things down. You just make it a practice. And then you read the book that kind of comes with the card to do the explanation. And that gets you really in tune to like, what is my intuition telling me? Like, what are the messages that I'm receiving? And it's really strengthened my intuition, because intuition is like a muscle. You have to go to the gym. Like, you have to use it or you lose it in a way. And so it's just like, how can you get more of those reps with your intuition? Like, where you're paying attention, you're listening to it, and you're intentionally holding space for it.
Yes. Oh my God. So many things I want to touch on. One, I am an emotional authority, but I do have a defined splenic center. So I do get those quick, quiet whispers, and I try to write them down as much as I can. And I find that similarly, they also sometimes are speaking to something that hasn't happened yet or comes around in the future. And then I can look back and be like, oh, it makes so much sense now. And so I think it's so important to not push anything away or disregard anything because it doesn't make sense yet, and to really just trust that quiet voice, and also to know that everyone's intuition talks to them in so many different ways, and it's so unique to each individual. And so even though you have a splenic authority and someone else might have a splenic authority, there will be similarities there, but it's really about getting to know how it shows up for you,
Yes.
and getting so intimate with that connection for yourself and understanding it so deeply, because no one else can unpack that for you. It's really it's really a journey you have to go on within yourself.
Yeah, I agree.
And then another thing I wanted to bring up is you were talking about oracle cards. I've recently started playing with tarot cards a bit, and I've used oracle cards as well, and I love them. But for some reason, I'm feeling really drawn to tarot cards recently. And just this last month, I got my first deck, and I absolutely love it. And I've been pulling one or two cards every morning and using it as a similar practice to strengthen my intuition and to strengthen my trust around messages I'm getting or feelings I'm having. And it's been so powerful for me, and really, really fun.
It's interesting you say tarot is calling you, because it's starting to call me. And I'm like, okay, I got to make room for a new hobby.
I'm loving it. And I'm very much a routine person, and I tend to stick to my routines, but the tarot, it just, it was one of those things that just easily found its way into my routine. It wasn't even hard to start something new. So, that and it's something I've been thinking about for a while, and then all of a sudden it just was time. So, trusting the
Nice.
timing.
I love that.
So, what is something that surprised you about your human design chart when you started to learn about it?
Hmm. That's a great question. I think, honestly, my spleen being defined, I think that up until human design, like learning about my splenic authority, I think I kind of took my intuition and my intuitive powers either for granted, or I didn't necessarily trust them in the same way. And I felt so because I was a lawyer and I've always been a bit analytical, that's a Virgo in me.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought that my mind has always been one of my greatest gifts. And so I was actually surprised that my mind was undefined. My crown and my ajna are both undefined. And that I was like, secretly or not so secretly, like this very intuitive person. Like I have multiple gates in my spleen as well. They're activated. And so that was actually something surprising to me because I went like 30 years thinking that I was this very analytical, logical person. And then now I'm like, okay, I'm really leaning into what does it look like to be a much more deeply intuitive person. So that was the most surprising thing to me at the time.
Mm, that's so interesting. I also have my an open head and crown center, and I am a very heady person. I have lots of thoughts. I'm always thinking. Also that Virgo brain, but I'm a very intuitive person, and I think that learning my human design has helped me trust my intuition more because people say, we learn that we're supposed to be logical and we're supposed to be analytical and we're supposed to do what makes sense. And people who are intuitive are seeing things or hearing things or having all these different quote unquote powers and learning that it can look different for each person and it can look different for me and I can still be a very intuitive person has been really interesting and has required a lot of self-trust.
Yes. Yep. Same.
And how are there other ways that you've developed that self-trust? I know, you were talking about how intuition is a muscle that you have to strengthen, and I absolutely agree. And you, have that practice with your oracle cards to do that. But are there any other things that you do regularly or have done in the past to really help strengthen your intuition and that trust around it?
Yes. So one of the things I do is like daily meditation. I struggled for years and years and years of meditation. Like my mind just could not calm down. However, I finally was able to dedicate myself to a practice. And for me, it was learning that I needed visualization type of meditation versus just breathing. I'm now able to do like straight up breathwork meditation, but that's something that was like a gateway for me to like really tap into it. Yoga is very helpful because I get a lot of intuitive hits, both when I'm doing yoga and taking walks, like nature walks or something that I really, really love. And honestly, like I discovered a new practice not too long ago, which is usually I would go on these walks and I would listen to a podcast like TBM, or I'll do like a deep imagining or some other, I would be listening to something. But recently I've started to take these long walks with nothing that I'm listening to. And I'm like intuitively trying to like be present in the moment. I'm asking myself like through the six senses of what do I see? What do I hear? What do I smell? What do I taste? What's around me? What's touching my body? And how do I feel? And I make it much more of this like meditative walking situation. And when I do that, I get so many intuitive gifts, like hits.
The power of silence and presence and nature, those three things combined, I mean, I think that those are the key ingredients to strengthening your intuition. And
1 million.
it can be so uncomfortable at first for a lot of people, and that can make people avoid it or constantly fill their space with noise or activity. But I think it's so important for everyone. Like if there's one thing I wish people did more, it was to spend more time in silence and more time in nature
Yeah.
because it it can truly change your brain chemistry. Like it can just realign you back to yourself.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I even recommend to my clients, I call it intentional solitude, which
Mm.
is how are you intentionally being silent, right? Because sometimes you're silent like on an accident, but like I think there is, to your point, like intentionally deciding to go out in nature to be quiet and to listen is just such a powerful practice. But people can be intentionally silent doing other things too. But I just echo that so much because it's just something about being in nature and being open. And it's like you're now open channel.
Yes. Well, everyone who has listened to this podcast before knows that I'm all about intentionality. And I think without the intention, you're just kind of living on autopilot mode. And the intention is what brings it back to this sacred practice and this deep connection. And I love that intentional solitude. I really, really love that.
Thank you.
When you are trying to explain to people what you do or how human design can help them, what do you say? How do you talk about that? I was recently with a lot of family. There was 43 of us together, a lot of extended family I hadn't seen in a long time. And people were asking me what I do. And, big part of what I do is working with human design. And it can be hard to explain it to people who are not in this spiritual space at all, or even people who are. And so I'm curious what what that can look like for you, how you try to explain your work.
Yeah, I totally agree that it's hard. It honestly at this point depends on the circumstances because I also am an executive coach. So if I feel like the crowd needs me to kind of lead with the executive coach piece, and I'm like, oh, and by the way, one of the modalities I use is human design amongst like other kind of assessment type tools like the Enneagram. But specific to human design, I just tell people like, human design is a tool, or a practice, and it's based off your birthday and your birth information. But it may sound very like it's astrology or very woo woo, but it's actually very practical. I think I emphasize like the practical elements because I'm not saying that astrology is not actionable, but I felt like a lot of times when you read, okay, we're both Virgos, there is no like action item attached to that where it's like, therefore X. And so I kind of break it down where I'm like, it's actually like 10 times much more accurate than like astrology or Myers Briggs or pick your poison, and it's actually actionable, so it's like informative, but there are ways that you can incorporate into your life to actually have like a better result. And then people kind of like it kind of piques their interest. If someone still doesn't get it, I've found the easiest way to explain human design to someone is to actually run their chart, because once it's experienced, people automatically get it. But admittedly, it is a bit kind of esoteric and like abstract to be like, oh yeah, it's like four different type of ancient practices, and like people like, especially they're not spiritual, they're not going to understand. And so if someone really really wants to understand, and they're not just like being like nosy for the sake of being nosy, I'm like, do you know your birth information? Like, I'll just pull up their chart really quickly and say like one or two, three things. And they're like, oh, I get it. And so that's usually how I handle people, especially when they're like, what are you doing? What's this newfound thing you're talking about? Is it like tarot? And I'm like, here we go.
I could not agree more. And I think that's such a good point. Helping people embody it versus just trying to explain it is so helpful. And it's that comes back to this piece about human design is meant to help you embody energy and alignment and not be so caught up in your head. So giving people
Yes,
the tools to actually do that is what will help them understand it. And I agree. I'm all about the practical, actionable steps. I mean, I have a 5 line in my profile. And although I love astrology so much, it feels like human design helps me actually take the action steps to live in alignment and be more authentic and really embody who I'm here to be.
I agree. 100%.
What what does living in alignment mean to you?
So living in alignment means honestly living one in personal and professional alignment. I think some people can pick either or, and I've tried to move my life where there isn't this separation, because for years I felt like I might have been personally aligned but not professionally aligned. And I think finally it's like my life is aligned, and my
Mm.
life can have elements of work and then elements of like family and play. And then it's just a living in accordance to what I call like my bar stools. This is something I developed like 10 years ago, but it's most closely to like your authentic code, to like harken back to Lacey's terminology, because people probably listen to your podcast know that too. but it's, am I showing up authentically? Am I showing up in accordance with my values or my bar stools? And also, am I working on myself? Like, am I giving myself time to rest, time to integrate, time to think? And every Monday, I, how people plan their week for each of the bar stools, or like even like an authentic coach, use a terminology. I plan out like, what do we want to do to fill these cups? So one of my like pillars is what I call kingdom first, which is like, am I putting my mind, body, and like my spiritual self like first? Am I taking care of myself? And so every week I set myself like, not a little, it's not a goal, but it's like, what are we doing this week to kind of tackle that, or to feed that part of me, to make sure that I am in alignment? Because I think sometimes we get out of alignment, and that's really helpful to bringing me back to alignment and understanding what I need to feel more centered and more grounded.
So it's kind of establishing your values or your authentic code or your bar stools, whatever language you want to use, and then checking in with yourself each week or whatever time frame you want. Am I doing something regularly that fills each of these cups?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I love that system. Very projector, very Virgo.
Oh, it's a system. And then when I feel misaligned, the, Barstool's authentic code becomes an audit list where I'm like, okay, like let's run through them. It's four of them. Like, how are we doing? Because sometimes I can over index on, maybe connection is one of mine. I may be full from a connection perspective, but I haven't like, worked out, or I haven't, meditated or ate anything healthy or something like that. So it's like a quick way for me to diagnose what's going on, and then like actively make moves in my own life to make me feel more aligned.
And I think the point you're making about it's not about living in alignment just in your work life or just in your relationships. It's all encompassing. Alignment is in every action we take, it's in our energy. And I think that's something that human design speaks to a lot as well, which is that, it talks about parts of our human design talk about our main purpose and, gifts and energy that we bring to the world. And we're not supposed to just do it in the quote unquote big parts of our life. It's supposed to bleed into every single thing we do, whether we're just walking down the street or sitting on the couch. Like we are always exuding this energy, and that is alignment. And it also speaks to the fact that there's nothing too small for us to put our full being into.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I agree.
Yeah, and just the importance of showing up for ourselves fully, and also everyone's purpose. We don't have to be some big famous person to have a really important purpose and to be a really important player in this game of life.
Mm-hmm. I agree. It's just like identifying what ecosystem you want to have that impact in, and the impact will, like to your point, it could be big or small.
Mm-hmm. And what is something that you learned about your human design that you have found it really challenging to integrate, that has been really hard for you or that you've had to work more on?
I think like most projectors, it's just taking the rest,
Mm.
you know, and I I don't know if I struggle with this the like some projectors like my partner is also a projector, and he really struggles to take rest for himself, so I'm not as bad as he is. But I think taking the rest, especially as two people who are like, building businesses and stuff like that, there's always more work you can do, there's always more output. And I think when you're so accustomed to these kind of corporate structures where you have to like, where it's not required, that's not the right word, but it's almost like the default is to work these long hour days and to be completely spent. That just doesn't work for me. And so honoring those times when I feel tired, but there's still a lot to do, has been one of the more challenging things, because I either will, give myself rest, but I'm still anxious about what I have to do, or I just kind of like power through. And so I think the times where resting isn't easy, that's been the hardest part of my human design to integrate.
Mm, Yeah, and I think that that's important for everyone to hear because, I'm a manifesting generator. I have all four of my energy centers defined, and still I push myself and burn myself out. And I think it's about defining what rest means to you and what it looks like to you. Because even if we have the energy, but our brain is tired from pushing too hard in our work life, then we should go outside and go for a walk. It doesn't mean that we have to, we need different types of rest at different times in our life. And it's really important to prioritize that. We're told that if we have the time, we should just be working and we should be giving it our all the time. And that simply doesn't work for anyone, really, I think.
I agree. And I think to your point about the different types of rest cannot be emphasized enough. There's a woman, I'm blanking on her name, but she has a book that's like the 7 types of rest because
Mm-hmm.
everyone has like a different way they approach it. So I always like recommend that to my projector clients. And then I mentioned my partner is a projector, and his idea of rest is not like mine. I'm like, I'm just on the couch, I'm watching my shows, I'm completely vegging out. His is like DJing because it's a creative project, like doing something creative, and in my mind, it looks very active. But for him, it's like a way of resting, which, I'm glad he's found his thing. But for me, I'm like, oh, that still feels like an effort.
Yeah, and that's why we really have to honor everyone's differences.
hmm hmm
What is something that you feel has made you feel different and separate from others that at first was hard for you to accept about yourself?
I think this entire journey,
Mm.
I think going from someone who was like in a very much corporate role that many people could understand, it made sense. You didn't have to like overly explain it. It was like a known quantity, to moving to an area where I'm doing a job that some people cannot understand. And I'm also living in a way that is different from, like, I call it Jacques V1. Like,
Mm.
I am on Jacques V2. And so, I've been pleased that, a lot of people in my closest tribe have seen my evolution as transformation and they've accepted it. But it's not lost on me that the way I show up now holistically, just as a human, even to some of the clothes I wear, is just materially different from the version of Jacques they might have met, say, 3, 4 years ago.
I mean, this is so relevant for me. I mean, being a manifesting generator, Scorpio rising, and just having lived the life I've had so many different changes and evolutions of myself. And I have spent so much time trying to be understood and trying to make sense to people. And going back to this gathering I just had with all my family, you know, I was having this moment of realization that I can't make people understand.
Okay.
And that's totally fine.
hmm
And that
And I
just
think
is what it is.
that's I agree. And I feel like that's one of the things that was uncomfortable at first, but now I'm just resolute in it. I don't know if it was Lacey or someone else, but they were saying that when you go through these changes and if you show up in your full power, it signals to people that you're sure about the direction. But sometimes, and I think I was guilty of this when I first was like on this huge transformation journey, I was showing up a bit more reticent, a bit more like half-hearted, like, hey, I'm doing this thing, it's a human design, like I kind of like tiptoed into it. And I started to realize that the more I'm just like, this is it, you're either on this train or you're off this train, and giving people the out, right? Like, I'm like, if the way I approach life and the way I coach or the way I like interpret human design isn't for you, unsubscribe. And it's okay. Like, everyone should pick their poison and like who they want to spend time around. And if that's not, if who I am today isn't your cup of tea, that's totally okay.
Absolutely. Confidence is everything, and just being sure of yourself. And of course,
hmm
there are times when we're not confident, when we're not sure of ourselves. But I think, especially when you know you're going to be surrounded by people who might not get it,
hmm
coming in with that protection and that armor and saying, I'm going to embody this confidence and this self-belief, and people will take it or leave it, and it won't, knowing that other people's perceptions or opinions about you is not about you. It's like that saying, what is the saying? It's what people think about you says more about them than it says about you.
I agree. Everyone's a mirror, and like everything's like a something to just like help you grow, and so and vice versa. But sometimes like we have that perspective, and the other person may or may not.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So, what is your favorite part about guiding others with human design?
Oh, so my personality son is in gate 47, like having aha moments.
Mine
Shut up.
too. Mine
What?
too.
So crazy.
That's so. I haven't met anyone else yet who has the same
That
one.
is, and that was one of the things that helped me kind of like once I started unpacking that part of my chart, I admittedly had like a lot of like hesitation around pursuing this path because it just felt so different from what I had done in before. And like knowing that I'm supposed to share these aha moments with others was like another like I don't know mark in the column of do it. And that really gave me confidence. But I mentioned my personality son because when I'm working with clients, especially the people who don't know human design at all or very well, I just love the moments when people have like their own personal aha. When you talk to someone, like recently, I was working with a coaching client and we do like a mix of executive coaching and human design. And she's working on a career transition and she's in her mid 40s and she has a 6 in her profile. I do too. And I was like, sixes always feel like late bloomers. And she like almost cried because she's like, I just always feel behind. And I'm like, I held space for her. I'm like, I do too. And so just allowing someone, I think shining a mirror and allowing someone to have the realization that things they thought might have been bad or shameful or not great about them are actually the way they were hardwired. And seeing the realization is like, I don't know, it's like currency for me.
I mean, you could have taken the words right out of my mouth. And that's one of the biggest reasons I started this podcast, was to help people realize that what they feel shame about, first of all, for how to open up the space for them to talk about it and to remove that shame, and to show them that everyone has something that they feel shame about, and but really it's just, it's often something that you feel makes you different, and it's part of your power, it's part of your magic. And I've never framed it in or thought of it in the way of helping others have their own aha moments, but it really is that. For me, it's always been, helping people understand themselves more and remove that shame. But it's so special either way to help people have that deeper understanding of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
What is something that you wish people talked about more, or that you wish you were able to talk about more? When we speak about shame, and I'm a big believer that shame festers when we don't talk about things. So is there something that you've realized that you wish people could talk about more openly?
Yeah, I think and this is something I realized recently. I mean, I think shame is a big one. Just kind of like what shame looks like, what it feels like. I don't think enough people really unpack that because I a lot of times we think of like shameful, but there are gradations to shame and like it can be very subtle but still like a major problem. But something I recently kind of unearthed in my own life is that a lot of times we talk about fear, and especially in human design with like the spleen, you're like, let's talk about the fears and things like that. And I think fear is like this very visceral emotion that's hard, that's easy to pinpoint. I feel afraid in some many cases, but it's like little cousin doubt is
Mm.
this emotion that I feel like we don't always talk about a lot because doubt to me is harder to pinpoint. It really exists in our subconscious often. It's that negative self-talk that a lot of us face because we can do the work on ourselves and be like, okay, this is my dream, let me go towards it in a courageous manner. But we don't still talk about that as you're on this path, even if you've conquered the initial fear of making a leap or doing whatever decision you want to make, you still have sometimes these little voices of doubt. And I feel like doubt is a harder, in my, at least in my opinion, a harder like dragon to conquer. And it hides kind of like almost in plain sight sometimes, but it's not always directly addressed.
That's such an interesting point. I've never thought about that. What is, how do you pinpoint doubt and unpack it and work with it? What does that look like for you?
I think just for me personally is getting better at watching the self talk and unbunking some of the self limiting beliefs. So, content is a great example. We all, as coaches, and I feel like as people, anyone with a brand is kind of living and dying by like, how do I feed the content engine?
Mm,
Is it a podcast? Is it a newsletter? Is it social media? All of these things, but it involves like putting yourself out there as a projector, especially, like a lot of times our natural inclination is to hide. We do not want to put ourselves out there all the time. But with me, I'm like, okay, how do I want to put myself out there on social media, right? So I may write a caption and I'm like, is that great? Will people get it? Is it too out there? And like that's me doubting my initial like creative thought. And I wouldn't, and it's not fear. I'm not afraid to post, but
mm,
I'm doubting like this caption. And that's why I said it's like more elusive. It's like smaller to catch. And so just paying attention to the talk. And a good trigger for me is when I'm hesitating. Because why am I hesitating? Am I hesitating because something actually should be like adjusted? Or am I hesitating because doubt has crept in? And then in like meditations and journaling, if I find like a major piece of doubt, I try to get to the root of like, why am I doubting this thing? When did I first learn it? Who taught it to me? Where else could it be? And just trying to get to the root of how I can show myself grace that I was doubting myself, but also try to do the work to reprogram doubt in a way that, isn't holding me back.
hmm I think it's so easy to have these doubts or have these thoughts of, no, you shouldn't do that, or you can't post that, or people think this and that, and to take that at face value. But really, there's something laying underneath the surface there and really getting to the root of what that is. Like, what story are we attaching to this belief? Do we think we'll be judged because X, Y, and Z? Like, there, it's going to be so unique and personal to you, but really understanding what is at the root of that will help us move forward with more confidence and to really know where that is coming from and to understand ourselves on that deeper level.
I agree.
Did you always have a natural inclination for this kind of this desire to know yourself deeply and to do this kind of work, or did it come later in life for you?
I think I've always had the desire to like understand myself better at a deep level. Like even when I was young, like remember those like Cosmo quizzes and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that people used to do. Like I was always doing the quizzes and the assessments and reading books and interested in like psychology and things like that. However, I never ever thought I would be a person that's a guide or a healer or a teacher. I just didn't think that was the path for me. And so I had to do my own work to try to like reconcile what I think when I was younger, like my vision of what I would be in terms of a career with what I now feel very called to, which was materially different from what I thought I was going to be doing in my life.
Mm. And I I resonate with that. I think for people who have big transformations or moments of growth or move from the version one of themselves to version two, three, four, five, it takes a lot of getting to the root and seeing what stories we're attaching to things and understanding ourselves. And it can be really painful and really challenging. I feel like there's a lot of grief that can come with that and letting go of who we thought we would be. Even if we're excited about who we're becoming, it can still be hard
Mhm.
to let go of this past version of ourselves. Did you experience that process?
Oh yeah, for sure. Like I mean, you grieve your old self. I think you grieve the relationships you had and the texture of them because when you have these major transformations, often your relationships can change. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're no longer friends or in a relationship with the people you once were, but I think you bring your new self to these old circumstances, and that's a complete like sometimes hodgepodge of like emotions and energy and stuff like that, and you just grieve the kind of like I think the knownness of who you used to be. I sometimes even when I think I've grieved parts of that, they kind of still come up. Sometimes I'm like, oh man, we got more to clear. That's crazy.
Hmm. Oh, my, I know. And I think that that's something that can be really challenging for people is being afraid of if they change, relationships will fall away
Mhm.
or it will shift their whole life. And it's possible, yes, it will definitely shift dynamics, but I think there can be a lot of unexpected magic and that happens in others when you show up more fully within yourself. Being
Mhm.
the one to go first. And even it might be even unconscious, but people will be inspired by that and be impacted by that. And if they're not and they fall away, then there's so much to grieve around that. And it's for the best for everyone.
I agree totally. And some I think like most of my tribe has stayed, and some relationships have shifted, but to your point, the greater good is the inspiration you have in other people's lives and just showing them that it is okay to change or it is okay to pivot or do something new, because society, I feel like, has just conditioned us for so long, especially with our parents' generation, that we're supposed to just be one thing. You pick a role. You are a tailor. You work at this company for 30 years. Like it was very and like one note. And I think
Mm,
that we're all waking up to just really embrace that we are all multifaceted. I think even if no one's not a manifesting generator, and like, what does that look like?
absolutely. None of us can just fit into one box. There's
Exactly.
so many layers to
Yeah.
who we are. Is there something happening or a part of your life that you feel like you are transforming and growing in right now that's, where you're feeling a little bit of that edge around change?
Definitely like friendships and relationships. I definitely feel it because in some instances I kind of growing and I'm noticing who I'm growing with, and they're growing and evolving and having their own transformations, and it's like this beautiful process. And then in other instances, I'm meeting new people who are like almost like my next soul family in a way. These are like amazing humans, and they're like the most synchronistic like experiences I've been having. But there's also a piece of my life when I go to these, places or spaces to be around people who are very much still rooted in like some of the behaviors that I just am not aligned with anymore. And that to me is where I feel the edge the most, because I'm showing up in a space where I used to fit and I no longer fit.
Hmm.
And that's really a me thing. And I don't, they may experience it too, but I deeply feel it.
Yeah, I mean, I've had that experience so many times in my life, and it can be really interesting to kind of watch the situation from an outsider's perspective and say you're with a friend group and you're having this experience of I don't think I fit here anymore, and to just watch it as if you're a third person and to not make a story around that, not make it good or bad or right or wrong, and just recognize the change that's happening and learn to come to terms with that.
I agree. Especially like with family members, right? Because often I feel like a lot of people struggle the most with family
Mm.
because sometimes you can kind of write them out of your life, but I think most times people don't want to do that. And so it's like, how do you coexist with individuals, especially if they're not going to change, right? And they're like, I'm being consistent. You changed. And like,
Hmm.
how do you reconcile that? And I think to your point, just giving it space, and it almost becomes like an out of body experience where you can become like the observer of your interaction, their interaction from like a higher point of view.
Yes, that's the visual I was kind of envisioning, and that's the experience that I've had, really seeing it from a higher point of view, not like disassociating, but like just like looking at it from a different perspective. And that's helped me come to terms with it. And also knowing that it's okay to bring different pieces of yourself to different relationships. And maybe this is the open identity center in me, but knowing that you don't have to completely end a relationship just because it's not the same as it was before, or you can't show up the same, or certain parts of it aren't working for you anymore. You can shift the dynamic and make it into something new and uh, be, bring the parts of you that work in each into each relationship.
I agree. And it's back to intentionality, right? It's like, how do you intentionally want to show up with this person or this group of people?
Yes, and that's been something that I've been really present with recently is when I am meeting up with someone or any interaction that I'm having, I want to be intentional, whether that's just to be present or be a good listener or just to show up and observe and watch. I want there to be an intention because it helps me be embodied. It helps me be more in alignment and it makes sure that I'm showing up as the best version of myself for that particular situation.
Yes, same. I couldn't say that. You took the words out of my mouth.
What is there a practice or something that you turn to when you find yourself struggling to be present and be in alignment and be intentional in your life?
Yeah, sacred pause for sure.
Mm,
Intentional solitude. Often, if I'm struggling to be present or something's off, I'm just likely doing too many things, or there are too many things bumbling around in my brain. And I think just taking a step back, and whether it's taking an afternoon off or going for a long walk, but I do something that intentionally slows me down, and then makes me become present, and then like in a meditative state for me to try to figure out what is going on within my body or around me and in my energy. But I think taking that sacred pause and just getting to the root of what's happening is critical, at least for me.
yeah, I think changing the pace and the environment can really help you shift your mindset. When I find myself getting, you know, really anxious or I'm just moving on autopilot, I'm just pushing through, I finding a way to shift up the pace or the environment can turn the whole thing around.
I agree. Yeah. Do you have like a favorite way to do that, like a go-to way?
Mm, yeah, well, it really depends on my mood. Being an emotional authority, it depends on what I'm needing. Often, a lot of times, it can be music. Like turning on
Mhm.
music can help me a lot, and particularly going outside, taking a couple deep breaths, or lying on the floor with my dog. Um,
I love
yeah,
that.
just grounding myself in some way, and also candles. Oh my strongest sense is smell. So
Ah,
having my candles, my incense, that helps me so much. I have like a different scent for different things that I'm doing.
same.
Yeah,
I got an instinct going now. We're like the same person.
I have my favorite candle going right now. It just, yeah, it helps so much.
Yeah. I mean, I have this like, I don't do it all the time, but there's a park by my house that's my favorite. And in this park, there's this massive tree. It's almost like a weeping willow type of tree. It isn't, but that's like what you can
Mm,
imagine with like these big branches that kind of like cascade down. And sometimes I'll go and I'll just like lean on the tree, and I just am like breathe in, and I imagine like all the anxieties like leaving my body, going into the earth, to try to like get some of that tension out. Massages or another one, just to get, because I carry a lot of tension in my like my body and trauma. So just trying to get that out has been super helpful.
yes. Oh my God. That's funny that you said that because I was thinking about I recently have had this desire to put my bare feet in the earth. And I mean, that's something I lived in Hawaii for a little bit and I used to walk barefoot all the time. And it was so healing. And I haven't been, since I left, I haven't done that as much. But recently I've been having this craving. It's like when because I also store a lot of tension in my body and love getting massages. And you know that feeling you get when you're just like, you can feel you're craving the massage so much. Like you can feel what it would feel like if someone were to start massaging your neck. I've been feeling that. in my feet, like craving my bare feet on the earth. And so I've been trying to do intentional practice of putting my bare feet in the grass just in my backyard daily. And it's been really nice.
Yeah, I love earthing. I love just going barefoot, especially if the sun is out and you're in the bare, like you're barefoot and in the sun, or in the sand too. Because something like
Mhm.
the water just becomes like such a healing experience for me.
Is
Mhm.
there an area of your life that you are hoping to strengthen your intuition around that you feel like,
Content.
okay, say more.
For years, I think I mentioned like I had this analytical mind, and I didn't view myself as a creative. Now, as a child, I was very creative, like most people. And then when I was older, at some point, I kind of just shut down that part of myself. I did not have creative pursuits. I was always a creative problem solver, but I wasn't like making things. And so now that I've transitioned to this new role, there was a lot of dissonance around me having to embody my creative self and like finding that. And I think that I am actually a very deeply intuitively creative person, but just I haven't been in the gym, right? So it's just now I'm getting in the reps. And so it feels like, I'm someone who hasn't worked out in like 10 years. Like the person who was like a high school athlete, but
Mm.
dropped it in college and now they're like in their 30s trying to like make a comeback. Like that's how I feel about creatively putting things out there. And like I used to sing and dance and make stuff. So just like refining that part of myself and then listening to my intuition and seeing how my intuition shows up in the actual execution and creation process.
I mean, I relate to a lot of that actually. I I guess I was creative when I was younger. I danced, I sang, I acted, but I never thought of myself as a creative person.
Same.
And I really disconnected from that creative side for a long time. And someone recently said to me, "Well, you're just so creative, so you don't get it." And I was like, I don't think of myself as a creative person. And I guess that was nice to hear that someone thought of me in that way. And even when someone says I'm an intuitive person, I still have a bit of an imposter syndrome, even though I know I am, and that's a huge part of my business. But I've had to own that for myself and own that I'm creative and own that I'm intuitive. And I think the two go hand in hand, really. And honestly,
Mhm.
I think we're all creative in our own ways. It's just about redefining what creativity means to you and how that shows up for you and letting yourself be in that flow, letting yourself get out of your head and just let whatever comes out of you come out.
Yeah. And to your point, I totally agree. I think everyone's creative. Brene Brown was saying that she also believes everyone's creative, but at some point, whether it's school, society, etc., it shuts down, for like many people. And her point was the creativity doesn't go away, it metastasizes. And when
Mm.
it metastasizes, it turns into kind of like when you judge others, where you're like, I got a real job, they need to get a real job, or like, I need to go do these things, or you're like, like making kind of like putting yourself on a pedestal in a way, or it can be various ways it happens. But I think, once it does metastasize, it's like, how do you work through this kind of feeling that has kind of like not been nurtured and watered and like let it grow and cultivate in the open versus like under the surface.
Yeah. And to bring it back to Lacey Phillips again, often what we are judging other people about is something that we want within ourselves or we're disowning within ourselves. And it's showing us something about who we are.
I agree.
Okay, so living intuitively wild means living dedicated to your true, authentic self no matter what. How do you feel like you live intuitively wild?
I think just taking chances. I swing for the
Mm.
fences. I like when I uprooted our life, my partner and myself, like we moved to a different space. Always just putting myself out there, even when it's uncomfortable, and asking myself, what does liberation or living intuitively wild, or like, or being just wild in general? I know a lot of women right now are trying to re-wild themselves, and I'm all for it. I even went to like a retreat earlier this year that was hosted by these two amazing angels, and the whole theme was wild and free. it's like, what does wild mean to you? And like taking that space to even contemplate, like, am I showing up as my wild self, or am I showing up as like what I think wild should look like? Because I think a lot of people are either like, I don't want to be wild because as women, witch wound, bad, scary. Or people sometimes show up as wild, but it's like someone else's definition of wild and not their own interpretation. So just taking the time and think through, like, what does it look like for Jacques specifically, not anyone else?
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like that's been a theme of our whole conversation is defining what being wild, being authentic, being in alignment, what does that look like for you? What does that mean for you? And that's all you need to know. And that's all you need to follow and understand. And
Yeah,
you don't need to understand other people's definition, and they don't need to understand yours.
period. Yeah, I think it's like it's getting clear and listening to our internal truth. But I think for so long, we kind of outsource our agency and what truth meant to other people or authorities or institutions.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why the intuition piece and the self trust and confidence is so important because, and human design helps us do that, do this. It helps us take the power back and say, I don't need to outsource my power. I can rely on what's coming from within.
Yes, agreed.
Well, Jacques, thank you so much. Please share what you are working on, what your offerings are. I know you have a lot of things that are very exciting. So please share with us.
Thank you. So yeah, like my business now is really kind of has two focuses. One is for individuals. So individuals who come to me and they want to work with me in a one-on-one capacity as a coach. I offer 3, 6, and 9 month programs based on what they need. And I also do, and from an individual perspective, like retreats. So different women have come to me and invited me to come and do human design and coaching workshops for them at the retreats that they're hosting. And I always love that experience because I love a good retreat. And a dream of mine has always been to host retreats myself. And then the other side of my business is a corporate focus. So I work with different businesses to create coaching programs for their employees. I also engage directly with businesses so that I can coach their employees on a one-to-one basis. So I work with them to try to figure out what their needs are, and then we just develop programming to support whatever cohort of employee we're trying to focus on. Whether it's a team focus where we're using like human design, like pentas and stuff like that, to try to figure out like what the energy, like what type of energy is present, or if it's just like mid-level executives or something like that, or women and or minorities, which is a really big focus of mine. Like helping them and trying to figure out ways to use human design and traditional executive coaching and create like my own proprietary way of bringing what many people, especially in some of these corporate institutions, feel like is very woo woo and like, does it work? And it's off putting, but packaging it in a way that it feels less scary, but also has the impact that we all know it can have.
So powerful, so important. And I'm so grateful to for you for coming on the podcast and sharing your energy and your light. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been a pleasure. I always want to do it. And it's always for just me, another like Virgo sun, Scorpio rising, gate 47 personality sun, like all the things. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining me on this episode of Intuitively Wild, the podcast. I hope it helped deepen your connection to yourself, sparked some insights, and inspired you to live intuitively wild. If you enjoyed this podcast, it would mean so much to me if you would share it with others and leave a rating and review. And please reach out to me. I would love to connect with you. I will see you next time for more magic.